What if I told you that the world's first documented deep state operated for nearly 3 centuries, systematically controlling political outcomes, manipulating leaders, and establishing patterns of institutional power that persist to this day? What if I told you this wasn't a modern phenomenon, but rather an ancient Roman institution that academic sources describe as more sophisticated and efficient than anything we've seen since? Welcome to Evolution Recognition, where we provide analytical tools to recognize how power actually operates across history. Today, we're examining what historians call the Praetorian Guard, but what evidence suggests was something far more significant than imperial bodyguards. According to academic research from the University of Craiova, the Praetorian Guard functioned as one of the forerunners of European secret services, operating as what sources describe as a comprehensive intelligence apparatus that controlled Roman politics for 285 years. Origins and institutional development. To understand how the world's first deep state emerged, we need to examine its origins during a period of Roman institutional transformation. The Praetorian Guard didn't appear overnight as a fully formed intelligence apparatus. Like many powerful institutions, it evolved gradually from more limited beginnings, accumulating authority through a process that sources describe as systematic expansion beyond its original mandate. During the Roman Republic, elite military commanders employed personal bodyguards called Praetoriani, named after the Praetorium, or commander's tent. These were essentially private security forces with no permanent institutional structure. However, when Augustus established the Roman Empire in 27 BCE, he transformed this informal arrangement into what historians recognize as a permanent state institution with unprecedented powers and privileges. Augustus created 9 cohorts of 500 to 1,000 men each, totaling approximately 4,500 to 9,000 armed personnel stationed in and around Rome. What made this significant wasn't just the numbers, but what sources describe as their unique legal and political position. Unlike regular legions stationed on distant frontiers, the Praetorian Guard operated at the heart of Roman power, with direct access to the emperor and broad authority within the capital city itself. The institutional development that followed reveals patterns familiar to anyone studying how security agencies expand their authority. In 2 BCE, Augustus appointed 2 equestrian prefects to command the guard, establishing what sources describe as a dual leadership structure designed to prevent any single individual from accumulating too much power. However, this safeguard would prove temporary, as subsequent developments demonstrate how institutional constraints can be systematically dismantled from within. The critical transformation occurred under Emperor Tiberius, when his prefect Lucius Aelius Sejanus eliminated the co-prefect system and gained sole command of the entire Praetorian apparatus. Sejanus's consolidation reveals classic techniques of institutional capture. He expanded the guard from 9 to 12 cohorts, increasing his personal command by 33% to approximately 12,000 loyal troops. More significantly, he centralized these forces from scattered garrisons into a single fortified complex called the Castra Praetoria, built outside Rome's walls in 23 CE. This centralization gave Sejanus what academic sources describe as unprecedented control over personnel and operations. He appointed each military tribune and centurion personally, creating what historians recognize as a loyalty network that extended throughout the institution. The result was an armed force of 12,000 men stationed at the capital, commanded by a single individual who owed his position not to democratic election or senatorial appointment, but to imperial favor alone. The Guard's institutional position gave them unparalleled access to the emperor and his inner circle. As personal bodyguards, they were present during private meetings, policy discussions, and strategic planning sessions. This access provided them with what intelligence analysts would recognize as comprehensive situational awareness about Roman political dynamics, economic policies, and military planning. More importantly, it gave them the information necessary to manipulate these processes for their own institutional benefit. Segment 3: Intelligence Operations and Secret Police Functions. What distinguished the Praetorian Guard from ordinary military units was their development of comprehensive intelligence capabilities that extended far beyond traditional security functions. Evidence reveals they operated what historians recognize as the first systematic intelligence service in European history, establishing patterns and techniques that would influence secret services for centuries to come. Within Rome itself, the Praetorian Guard functioned as a secret police force. They engaged in what historians document as espionage, intimidation, arrests, and killings directed against Roman citizens who were perceived as threats to imperial authority. Evidence shows they disguised themselves as ordinary citizens at public events, monitoring conversations and identifying individuals who expressed dissent or criticism of imperial policies. The Guard maintained a specialized intelligence unit called the Speculatores, which served as both couriers and covert operatives. These personnel conducted what historians recognize as classic intelligence operations, including surveillance, infiltration, and elimination of targets deemed threatening to imperial security. The Speculatores operated throughout the Roman Empire, establishing what academic sources characterize as intelligence networks that preceded formal military conquest in many regions. What makes these operations particularly significant is their systematic nature and institutional permanence. Unlike ad hoc intelligence gathering by individual commanders or temporary security measures during specific crises, the Praetorian Guard developed standardized intelligence procedures and permanent operational capabilities. They maintained detailed records of potential threats, tracked the activities of suspicious individuals, and coordinated their operations across multiple geographic regions. The Guard's information monopoly became a source of institutional power that extended far beyond their official security mandate. By controlling access to critical intelligence and managing the flow of information to the emperor, they gained significant influence over imperial decision-making processes. Sources describe how they could shape policy outcomes by determining what information reached the emperor and how that information was presented and interpreted. The intelligence operations also included systematic elimination of threats through covert assassination and targeted killings. The Guard conducted what sources describe as secret executions of individuals who posed political, military, or ideological challenges to imperial authority. These operations were carried out with what academic research characterizes as professional efficiency and institutional coordination, suggesting well-developed procedures and specialized personnel. Segment 4. Political manipulation and emperor control. Evidence shows the Praetorian Guard developed multiple mechanisms for controlling emperors and shaping political outcomes. They could acclaim or depose emperors, determine succession outcomes, manipulate policy decisions, and eliminate political rivals through both overt and covert means. What makes this particularly significant is how these capabilities were institutionalized and systematically employed over nearly 3 centuries of Roman history. The assassination record reveals the extent of Praetorian political control. Sources document that the Guard murdered at least 13 emperors, including Caligula in 41 CE, Commodus in 192 CE, Caracalla in 217 CE, and Elagabalus in 222 CE. What makes these assassinations significant isn't just their frequency, but what historians recognize as their systematic nature and political motivation. The Guard eliminated emperors who threatened their institutional interests, opposed their policy preferences, or failed to provide adequate financial compensation for their support. What makes the Praetorian political manipulation particularly significant is how it reveals the limitations of formal institutional constraints when faced with organized, systematic pressure from security institutions. The Roman system included various checks and balances designed to prevent the concentration of power, including senatorial oversight, legal procedures, and traditional limitations on military authority within the city of Rome. However, evidence suggests the Guard systematically circumvented or neutralized these constraints through their combination of violence capabilities, information control, and direct access to imperial authority. The result was what historians recognize as a fundamental transformation of Roman governance, where real executive power shifted from elected officials and traditional institutions to an unelected security apparatus operating according to its own institutional logic and interests. Academic sources suggest this transformation was so complete that the essence of Roman executive power became the Praetorian Guard itself, rather than the emperor or other formal governmental institutions. Segment 5. Modern parallels and pattern recognition. Praetorian model reveals several key characteristics that appear consistently across different historical periods and political contexts. These include the gradual expansion of security mandates beyond original limitations, the accumulation of intelligence capabilities that provide information advantages over other institutions, the development of direct access to executive authority that bypasses traditional oversight mechanisms, and the systematic use of crisis situations to justify expanded powers and reduced accountability. The institutional evolution pattern shows how security agencies can transform from limited, specialized functions into comprehensive political actors with broad influence over policy outcomes. The Praetorian Guard began as personal bodyguards with narrow security responsibilities but evolved into what sources describe as a multi-domain intelligence and political organization that controlled succession, influenced policy, and eliminated threats to its institutional interests. Modern intelligence and security agencies display what historians recognize as similar evolutionary patterns. They often begin with specific, limited mandates related to external threats or particular security challenges. However, evidence from multiple historical periods suggests these institutions tend to expand their activities into domestic surveillance, political intelligence, and policy influence as they develop operational capabilities and institutional confidence. Contemporary security institutions operate where their specialized intelligence capabilities provide them with knowledge and analytical resources that exceed those available to elected officials, legislative oversight bodies, and the general public. This information asymmetry creates what historians recognize as structural advantages that can be leveraged for institutional benefit rather than public service. The access control pattern reveals how security institutions can gain disproportionate influence by managing the flow of information and personnel around executive authority. Sejanus's control over access to Tiberius demonstrates what academic sources describe as a classic technique for institutional capture, where security personnel use their protective function to isolate leaders from alternative sources of information and advice. Evidence from various historical periods suggests this access control mechanism appears consistently in different political systems and cultural contexts. Security institutions often develop what historians characterize as special relationships with executive authority based on their protective responsibilities, intelligence capabilities, and crisis response functions. These relationships can evolve into dependency relationships, where leaders become increasingly reliant on security institutions for information, analysis, and policy recommendations. The crisis exploitation pattern shows how security institutions can use emergency situations to justify expanded powers, reduced oversight, and increased resources. The Praetorian Guard systematically exploited what sources describe as military emergencies, political instabilities, and succession crises to expand their authority and eliminate constraints on their operations. Historical analysis reveals what academic sources characterize as consistent patterns of crisis exploitation by security institutions across different eras and political systems. Emergency situations create opportunities for institutional expansion, where normal oversight procedures are suspended, traditional limitations are relaxed, and public attention is focused on immediate threats rather than long-term institutional accountability. The elimination capability represents the ultimate expression of institutional power, where security agencies can remove threats to their interests through both legal and extra-legal means. The Praetorian Guard's assassination record demonstrates systematic use of violence to shape political outcomes and eliminate opposition to their institutional agenda. While modern democratic systems include legal protections and oversight mechanisms designed to prevent such direct violence, evidence suggests that security institutions retain various forms of elimination capabilities, including career destruction, legal prosecution, public discrediting, and institutional marginalization of individuals who challenge their authority or expose their operations. The financial corruption pattern reveals how security institutions can develop what historians characterize as systematic rent-seeking behaviors, where they use their political influence to secure financial benefits for their organization and personnel. The Praetorian Guard's auction of the imperial throne represents an extreme example, but sources document consistent patterns of financial manipulation and corruption throughout their institutional history. Contemporary analysis suggests what academic research describes as similar financial dynamics in modern security institutions, where their unique position and capabilities create opportunities for institutional benefit that may not align with broader public interests. These can include budget expansion, contractor relationships, revolving door employment, and policy influence that benefits institutional stakeholders rather than democratic accountability. Segment 6: Institutional Persistence and Historical Impact. What makes the Praetorian Guard historically significant isn't just their individual operations, but their institutional persistence and their influence on subsequent political developments. For 285 years, from 27 BCE to 312 CE, they maintained consistent patterns of political manipulation, intelligence operations, and institutional self-interest that transcended individual emperors, political crises, and broader social changes. However, it's important to recognize what academic research emphasizes about institutional complexity and multiple causation. The development of powerful security institutions results from various interacting factors, including genuine security threats, political instability, technological capabilities, and cultural values regarding authority and accountability. The Praetorian model represents one possible outcome among many, not an inevitable result of creating security institutions. What the historical evidence provides is analytical tools for recognizing when security institutions begin displaying Praetorian characteristics. These include expansion beyond original mandates, development of independent political agendas, systematic circumvention of oversight mechanisms, and the prioritization of institutional interests over public service or democratic accountability. The ultimate fate of the Praetorian Guard offers insights into how such institutions can be constrained or eliminated. Emperor Constantine I finally disbanded the Guard in 312 CE as part of broader governmental reforms and military reorganization. However, this required what historians recognize as exceptional circumstances, including military victory over rivals, comprehensive institutional restructuring, and the establishment of alternative security arrangements. Evidence suggests that constraining powerful security institutions requires sustained political will, alternative institutional arrangements, and favorable circumstances that rarely align in normal political environments. The Praetorian Guard's 285-year persistence demonstrates what historians recognize as the inherent advantages that security institutions possess in political competition with other governmental organizations. Segment 7: Conclusion and Analytical Framework. The historical evidence we've examined reveals a comprehensive institutional model for understanding how security organizations can evolve beyond their original mandates to become independent political actors with significant influence over governmental outcomes. The Praetorian Guard represents what historians recognize as the first documented example of systematic institutional capture by a security apparatus, establishing patterns that have appeared in various forms throughout subsequent history. The Praetorian model demonstrates what historians emphasize about the importance of institutional design and oversight mechanisms in maintaining democratic accountability. Evidence suggests that powerful institutions, particularly those with specialized capabilities and security functions, require robust constraints, transparent oversight, and systematic accountability measures to prevent the accumulation of power that exceeds their public service mandate. However, the historical record also reveals the inherent challenges in maintaining such constraints over extended periods. The Praetorian Guard's ability to systematically circumvent or neutralize oversight mechanisms demonstrates what historians recognize as the adaptive capabilities of institutional actors who possess information advantages, specialized skills, and direct access to executive authority. What this suggests is the importance of what academic sources characterize as vigilant civic engagement and institutional awareness. Republican systems depend on informed public understanding of how power actually operates, including recognition of the potential for institutional capture and the systematic circumvention of democratic oversight mechanisms. It's crucial to understand what academic research emphasizes about the complexity of institutional analysis. Real-world situations involve multiple interacting factors, competing interests, and legitimate security requirements that must be balanced against accountability concerns. The goal isn't to eliminate security institutions or ignore genuine threats, but rather to maintain what historians recognize as appropriate balance between security capabilities and Republican oversight. The Praetorian Guard operated for 285 years because Roman citizens, senators, and even emperors gradually accepted the normalization of institutional power that exceeded democratic constraints. Whether similar patterns emerge in any contemporary context depends largely on what historians recognize as the vigilance and engagement of informed citizens who understand how institutional capture occurs and possess the analytical tools necessary to recognize and respond to such developments. That's the goal of evolution recognition, providing you with the historical perspective and analytical capabilities necessary to think critically about power, institutions, and accountability in any era or political system. The patterns persist across history, but the outcomes depend on what academic sources emphasize as the choices made by informed individuals who understand how these dynamics actually operate.